Good morning. Yesterday I was driving around and looking at the different piles of sheetrock and trash in the ditches waiting to be picked up and cleaned up after the storm, but there was something else I hadn't thought of that was in the ditches. I saw vehicles. And at first, I could wrap my mind around some of it because growing up in Kansas, I helped clean up a lot of tornadoes beginning at a young age. Probably wasn't wise of my dad to have me help with tornado cleanup at the ages of 6 or 7, but that's what we did. You just jumped in. You helped your neighbors. But what gets to you is when you see pile after pile after pile, and you know those cribs belonged to their kids. That sheetrock is where they hung pictures on. The tables are where they had memories. You know, I don't have to tell you. But for me, having only been here 9 months, it was overwhelming. That was my first taste of that here, where it's just so widespread. With a tornado, it's concentrated. With a flood, as you well know, it's just all over. And I know this flooding was more concentrated than Harvey. But this flooding also came down quicker and higher where it hit. And there's still a lot of recovery ahead. Over the last week, as we've been given names to contact people, and we're still in the middle of doing that, people are still in assessment because it's different. There's no two floods the same. This is completely different. And on one hand, you want to say, I've heard some people say, well, I've been through this before. And I say, yeah, but this is completely different. Different storm, different name, different time, different season. And so I'm glad that we as a church are making ourselves available either personally in our friendships lives, or even as a church we've been able to do some things together. And one of those things, right now we are hosting a cleanup team from Ecclesia Christian Church in Conway, South Carolina, and they've got their own mission they're working with. So they've teamed up with us on a thing or two, but they're also working with other churches and other communities just knocking stuff out. And there's different ways we're being able to be a part of the recovery. But the message I had for this morning was already titled Opening Calendars, Making Room for the Spontaneous. I established that name almost 2 months ago. It's almost like sometimes God has a better idea for what I should preach than I do. The more I prayed about this, I ended up changing up my passage to Matthew chapter 4, verses 18 through 22. Because we're talking about hospitality. This series, Open, Living an Open Life. We're talking about hospitality, an attitude of hospitality that says, you're welcome in my space. Yes, you're welcome in my home. You're welcome in my car. You're welcome in whatever it is your space is. And here we see Jesus invites disciples into his space, but the disciples' response is what really grabbed my attention in Matthew chapter 4. I'm not going to have the passage up on the screen, so I'll give you a little bit of time to turn there. If you have a mobile device or you have a Bible with you, I'll give you some time. Go to Matthew chapter 14. Matthew chapter 14. Sorry, I said 4. Did I? Oh, good. I didn't put it up on the screen. Woo! Matthew chapter 14. All right, Matthew chapter 14. Let me tell you, while you turn there to Matthew chapter 14, let me tell you about something that happened to me that revealed to me the importance of making room for the spontaneous. I was 13 years old, and as was the custom, we traveled out to Charlotte, North Carolina, and we go to a conference in Knoxville once a year, and then we'd go see my dad's family in Charlotte twice a year. He grew up in a foster home out there, and they were like family to us, so we'd go see them. And then sometimes we go camping in Boone, North Carolina, or hang out at either Myrtle Beach or North Carolina Beach or Wilmington Beach in North Carolina. And this one particular year, we stayed in a cabin. And on the way back, we also did some camping. So we're hauling a camper trailer in overdrive in the mountains. So what do you think happened to the transmission about 800 miles from home? The transmission blows out. We're on our way home. Dad's used up all of his vacation time for the year. My parents are very transparent about their finances, and they say, yeah, we're broke, so let's go home. We're broke. We had just enough money to get back. Van breaks down on the side of the road in Johnston City, Illinois. Everybody knows about Johnston City, Illinois, right? Didn't think so. We didn't either. So we're coasting in second gear. We make our way off a place we'd never been, and right next to the exit is a campground. So we pull in and just pull into a random spot. Because Dad's like, I don't know how much time we've got left. So there are 5 of us kids. There's 5 of us kids. Who would be crazy enough to have 5 kids? Oh, okay. And we pulled into the spot. Dad talks to the camp managers and says, hey, I don't, tell me how much you charge a night. I may have taken the wrong spot. They said, don't worry about it. You guys just stay here as long as you need. We won't charge you. Dad didn't even tell them about the hardship. They just said, we won't charge you. Okay. He could tell something was off. We make dinner because we had things in the camper. We're trying to keep a rhythm of normalcy here. We had chicken Alfredo. I'll never forget. It was already there, ready to go. It was canned chicken, but that counts. Anyway, we had dinner, and it was Saturday night. So Dad said, well, I don't know what we're going to do next, but I know tomorrow's Sunday. So I guess we got to find a church, don't we? It was Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day, Mom. We walked a couple blocks to a church. All 5, as you can imagine, like ducks and ducklings. I mean, it was a sight. We walked. Didn't know where we were going. We didn't have cell phones with Google Maps to know where we were or the specifics. So we just walked, and we saw a church with a denomination we were familiar with. So we went in there, and that church took us in. And that morning, my mom won the one present with the most kids. $100 gift card. I think I got another idea for Father's and Mother's Day. Provision for a local grocery store. As we're leaving, the pastor and his wife, as they're shaking hands, say, hey, what are you guys doing for lunch today? I haven't seen you before. Why don't we take you out to eat? They took us out to eat, and they asked, so what are you guys doing in town? And I said, well, we're kind of stuck. I said, I'll tell you what, the pastor and his wife walked home and let us take their car to the camper trailer. All these people at the church made room for the spontaneous. They taught me a lesson, even down to the mechanic. The mechanic from the church, professional mechanic, comes over and says, hey, I heard something's wrong with your van. Dad said, yeah, transmission's out. The guy said, okay, tell you what, I know you don't have much money right now, so he said, I'll take your 12-volt DeWalt drill, and I'll take your camcorder, and we'll call it even. Swapped out, multi-$1,000 job, and he ended up sending the stuff back after we got home. Except for the drill. He said, that's mine. These people made room for the spontaneous. It wasn't in our plans, it wasn't in their plans, but it was in God's plans, and hearts were already moved exactly where they needed to be. You look at Matthew chapter 14, and you start down in verse 18. You see an opportunity of being obedient to the spontaneous. And actually, it was Matthew chapter 4. I've gone through a lot of passages this week. We're going to go back to Matthew. You got already on your phone, Matthew chapter 4. Now go to actually chapter 4, verses 18 through 22. See, they're spontaneous for you. As Jesus was walking along the Sea of Galilee, he saw 2 brothers, Simon, who was called Peter, and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the sea since they were fishermen. So hold on. These guys are not doing anything out of the ordinary, are they? What are they doing? They're fishing. What's that? Their job. They're on the clock. They're working. Verse 19, follow me, Jesus told them, and I'll make you fish for people. Now look at verse 20. What's the first word there in verse 20? Immediately, right away, instantly, immediately, they left their nets and followed him. What does that mean? They walked off the job. They walked off the job because Jesus said, follow me. I need you to come with me and reach out for people. They quit. Verse 21, going on from there, he saw 2 other brothers, James the son of Zebedee and his brother John. They were in a boat with Zebedee, their father, mending their nets. Again, on the clock, verse 22. He called them. Immediately they left their boat and their father and followed him. Now put yourself in the father's shoes for a minute. You know, the father wants the job done, and he wants it done right, and he wants it done now. And he's always having to get on to the boys for horsing around while it's work time. Stop arguing. Stop messing around. It's work to do. And all of a sudden the boat starts rocking. And he's like, what happened? He looked. It's rocking because his boys jumped off the boat. They made room for the spontaneous, and they obeyed. If we're going to be hospitable, and we're going to obey the voice of God, when he tells us to follow him by reaching out for people, we have to make room in our hearts for the spontaneous. We have to practice saying no to a lot of good things so we can say yes to the best things. In the parenting class this morning, Chris mentioned that him and Carrie made a decision as parents to say, as a family, we support whatever academic excellence you want to follow through with at any level of education, but we as a household are going to prioritize ministry as a family. They had to put that stake in the ground, and maybe that sounds tough and that sounds harsh, but I think that is making room for the spontaneous. So when they can say, hey kids, I know you got this thing going on tonight, but so-and-so's hot water heater broke and their carpet's flooded out, let's go help them. Then that starts cultivating an atmosphere of making room for the spontaneous. Did Jesus set forth a strategy and a schedule to his disciples? Did he give them a Google Calendar event and say, sign up for this? He said, time to go. Time to go. Let's go. Rick Vines is going to make his way up here and share, again, just to be clear what's going on. This Vines Water Restoration Company is a part of Ecclesia, a church plant that's been thriving in Conway, South Carolina. And so we have people at the church working for Vines and all of Vines here attending Ecclesia. So they merged together and they said, let's take our professional skill, professional equipment, because they heard what happened here, and their immediate response was obey. Just go. We've already got a plan. We've got our responsibilities together. Let's go. So share what did it look like to make room for the spontaneous, Rick?
It was unbelievable. We prepared and decided, one of the guys, found out there was a flood. I had no idea that you guys even experienced another flood. And it was actually Jake that brought it to me at the office and said, Rick, how about going to Texas, man? And I don't think he was prepared for the answer that I was fixing to give him. I said, man, that's a good idea. We just got finished up with quite of our, a lot of our large projects that we were working on. So we packed up immediately, reached out to a couple guys, and they were all on board as well. It was unbelievable that the response that we've got from our guys and the commitment that they had. And so before we left, I went to go kiss my wife goodbye at church, and pulled into the church, and Matt, our preacher, was there, and he said, "Where are you guys going, man?" I said, "Well, we decided we're going to pack up and go help in Texas. We had so many people from your area come down and assist in Hurricane Florence in our area." And he asked me, "Rick, can I come with you?" And it was just another spontaneous event. I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." I didn't have a rider, so. I think of a story when I think about spontaneous action from the Bible, and it may not be a story a lot of you, recall. It's kind of a hidden story, and I just thought it was really cool, and I related it to this. And the story comes out of 1 Samuel chapter 30, starting in verse 1. So David and his men, and I'll kind of just reference it. David and his men come back from a long journey and whatever they were doing to major devastation. They come rolling up in their town in Ziklag and find that the Amalekites have come in and just wiped them out. They burned their houses down. They took all of their children, all of their wives, and so arriving here, they, again, in relating to this area, just absolute devastation. Well, David was upset, as well as all of his people, and so he obviously took this to the Lord and said, "Lord," and asked him a simple question. He asked the Lord. He said, "Shall I pursue the raiding party, and will I overtake them?" Is the question that he asked. And it says here in verse 8, it says, "Pursue them," he answered. "You will certainly overtake them and succeed in your rescue." So David and his men, what I find very unique in this story is David and his men didn't ask for direction. They didn't ask for where to go. They simply loaded up all of their troops, and they went in a direction, not having any idea. You've got to think no roads, so they're in a different time here. And they just followed the path, having faith that God would lead them and direct them when they arrived to where they needed to arrive. And I find that so awesome. And along the way, another thing that I grab out of this is, all the people that we've met here along our experience and our travels, David also finds the opportunity to bless someone else as he's on his mission through his devastated time. So think about going through everything you guys are going through with the flooding and your house being in turmoil. And it's tough sometimes to think, to reach out and to help someone else during these times. Well, David and his men found a guy who was hungry and thirsty, and along their way in their travels, they fed him and gave him something to drink. And lo and behold, he was the key to what, what David was needing to know. He gave them every bit of the information of who robbed them, when they did it, where they went. So because David and his men took the time to be generous, as in your series, God fulfilled the information that they were waiting on. So being spontaneous, I love the experience. It's something that our church has really always just, ready, fire, aim. We kind of shoot and then aim, I feel like, or try to aim, and it's just a wonderful experience to be able to allow really God to intervene and God to really direct your path. So been a great blessing to us and our family.
Awesome.
Yeah, so absolutely. We thank you guys so much for the generosity and hospitality. Thank you. Yep. So thank you again, guys.
Thanks for sharing. Matt, their minister, was also here. Is my microphone back on? On? Oh, okay, all right. I've got such a loud mouth, I can't tell if the microphone's on or not. I just irritate my own senses. But I appreciate Rick sharing, and especially where that inspiration comes from. Doesn't that sound like the story of Abraham? Go to a land I'm going to show you. It's not on Google Maps yet. Just go. And for my end of the story, one of the mentors I work at with Nexus Church Planning and Leadership Care and Revitalization, his name was Greg Garcia. He gives me a call. He says, hey, there's a guy named Matt Wilson and his crew headed out to your area. Give him a call. So I called Matt and I called Rick, and I was able to find out, hey, we don't exactly have a plan as for where we're staying yet or where the exact needs are just in that area. And I said, let me talk to them. So I called people, get back and forth with people, and then finally said, hey, we're good to go. You got a place to stay. And in that process then, I've been able to find other spiritual siblings I've never met before, brothers and sisters in Christ, who are just willing to merge in with us. We had to make room for the spontaneous. Now, Alvin used the example of pews. This is one reason I don't like pews. Because if we had a bigger team, and there may be more teams to come, guess what? These chairs stack up against the wall. We've literally made room for the spontaneous. We had area for them to just make themselves at home. That's one small taste of it. But then let's bring it home a little bit more. What about spontaneous in your heart? Where do you have room for the spontaneous in your heart? Yeah, I know we're busy. Again, we can all play the busy game, but can you delete some things on your calendar if somebody comes up to you and says, hey, I need to talk? Or are you going to say, yeah, next Tuesday between 6:45 p.m. and 7:11 p.m., I've got a moment? I've had to work on this. Just last week. Now, here's what I like about Jan Pfaff. She's going to shoot straight, because I was talking about this. She said, hey, I invited you to eat with the crew and us last week, and you said you had appointments, and which is true. I had 2 more appointments after dinner time. I was actually running late. But I also could have taken time to fellowship. Now, granted, the other appointments were significant as well. And sometimes that's hard, but are we doing the will of the Father? That's this filter in all of this, because this was a call for Jesus. Now, if my next plan was to go Netflix and just watch whatever, just binge watch Net, well, obviously no. But even harder, what if my next plan was something with the family? Okay, then what do? Well, I say you include the family. That's been Olivia and I's philosophy. If we can, we include the family. All right? Well, and that's, again, Chris spoke to that this morning and how they raise up their kids, and part of that is making room for the spontaneous. But in this story with Peter, you put yourself in Peter's shoes. Now, there's 4 guys mentioned who are called in the text here in Matthew chapter 4, but I want you to put yourself in Peter's shoes. Just like Rick said, put yourself in David's shoes. I would say if there was a David of the New Testament, and I know, Jesus is of the lineage of David, but if there was somebody with the attitude of David, I'd say it'd be Peter. Peter was a get-it-done kind of guy. Peter was the one raising his hand before the question was over. Peter was the one who said, all right, I'm ready to go to battle now. And Jesus was like, no, that's not even what I'm saying, Peter. Peter was all about spontaneity. And here, Peter does it. He follows Jesus. But hold on, there's something interesting in the invitation. Jesus clearly said, follow me, and I will make you fish for people. That word people means people. Peter heard, come with me and fish for Jews. You want to know how I know that? When you get to Acts chapter 10 and Jesus says it's time to go talk to the Gentiles, Peter's like, no. No. The Jews, they're unclean, man. You're not reaching the Jews. God makes it clear. Do not call anything that I've said clean. Don't call it unclean. Don't contradict me on this, Peter. Peter had to have one of the largest moments of spontaneous truth in his life because he had been taught as a good Jew, and he thought now as a good Jew-Christian hybrid, that you didn't associate with certain people. That had never been addressed, and God addressed it head on. And he didn't take Peter to a conference, and he didn't take Peter through a college course, and he didn't take Peter through a mentor. He just said, Peter, go reach the Gentiles. And Peter's like, that's not in my training manual. How many times did God have to tell Peter to go reach the Gentiles? Do you remember? Let's go there. Acts chapter 10. Some of you are taking random guesses, aren't you? I appreciate that. That's a very Peter-like thing to do. I like that. I'm proud of that. That was good. Acts chapter 10, verses 9 through 48. We're going to read it all. I'm just kidding. Acts chapter 10. We do it if we needed to. Acts chapter 10, we get this story of Peter. So Peter's already said, hey, Lord, I'll follow you. Hey, I'll be fishers of people. And then Acts chapter 10, verse 9, later on, Jesus Christ has been crucified and he's rose again and he's ascended and the church has been sent out and they're scattering like wildfire. And then Acts chapter 10, verse 9, the next day as they were traveling and nearing the city, Peter went up to pray on the housetop about noon. Then this would have been like a porch. He's not actually up on a shingled roof about to fall off, all right? He's on the porch, basically. Verse 10, then he became hungry, and he wanted to eat. Hold it. Last time Peter was just doing his job, normal work day. This time Peter wants to eat, normal part of the day. But while they were preparing something, he went into a visionary state. In other words, God was moving in his heart. Have you ever had that to where it almost makes you sick? Like God is speaking, moving something in you, or a truth bomb hits you all of a sudden, and you're like, I don't know if I can handle this right now. That's what happens to Peter. He's in a visionary state. He saw heaven open and an object that resembled a large sheet coming down, being lowered by its four corners to the earth. Verse 12, in it were all four-footed animals and reptiles on the earth and birds of the sky. Then a voice said to him, get up, Peter, kill and eat. Verse 14, no, Lord, Peter said, for I've never eaten anything common or ritually unclean. Again, a second time, the voice appeared to him, what God has made clean, you must not call common. Verse 16, this happened 3 times, and then the object was taken back up to heaven. Peter had trouble with the spontaneous at this point. You know why? Because church people are the worst about getting into a groove. And while we're in the middle of a groove, we say we're not in a groove. But we still get in a groove anyway. We still get in a rut. You've heard this definition of a rut. What is a rut but a grave with both ends kicked out? You want to see a rut? Try watching a Ford try to get out of the mud. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But we get into a rut, we get stuck, because somehow we get off the path. And Rick was even referencing a path. And Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And we're also taught by Jesus that there is a path. But what are we told that path looks like? Does it look more like a muddy mountain trail? Or does it look more like a paved highway? What does the trail to righteousness look like? The way that leads to destruction is what? Wide, broad, paved. It's got all the markings and lines and rest stops along the way. But the pathway to righteousness is what? It's narrow, it's hard, it's difficult. Listen, spontaneous. It's not a predictable road. I know in Tennessee, you thought you were safe driving some of these 1.5 lane roads, and all of a sudden you see a turn and you think it's a turn. And no, it's a turn. And so I'm coming up, and I'm like, I'll slow down to about 45, and I realize if I do 45, we're sailing over the edge of this thing. A lot of spontaneous and hills and ups and downs. Listen, that is the road we walk with God. My earpiece is giving me fits today here. So here, actually, I'm going to do this. Let me turn off this microphone. 2, 3, we're on. I'm still going to wear it because I think I look cool with it, so I'm going to keep wearing it. But listen, Peter in Acts chapter 10, that story is not over because Peter had this process he went through, and I want you to hear this, and I won't be much longer. I know it's Family Sunday, and I know the parents are getting bored. So what we've got here is Peter gets a revelation, and then he has to go through orientation. He has to figure out, wow, what is going on here? You see that where he says, while Peter was thinking about the vision, the Spirit told him, 3 men are here looking for you. So Peter's up there like, what just happened? This blew his mind. And he goes from orientation to a direct invitation. People come to the door and say, Peter, we need you to come with us. And then he has to have confirmation and confirmation. They find out the people came to the door and told Peter, basically, this vision you just had from God, the unclean thing you're supposed to reach, is the household of Cornelius, a Greek. They said, Cornelius, a centurion, an upright and God-fearing man, and listen to this, who has a good reputation with the whole Jewish nation. Now, why was that necessary? Was Peter that racist? He had to hear that? Well, no. In this case, he needed some affirmation that somebody could lend credibility to where he was called to go. That's what that was about. Peter, God's calling you into the unknown, but God's already going ahead of you. There's already people there who love him and fear him, and you just need to obey. But this is all spontaneous. Peter is still soaking this in. Matter of fact, after these other confirmations, Peter has to get oriented again. He's still dazed. So listen, Peter's obedient. He goes to the centurion, and he still has to get his bearings, because we're told in verse 26, Peter helped him. He met Cornelius, and Cornelius said, I'm so glad you're here, Peter. In Acts chapter 10, now verse 26. But Peter helped up Cornelius after he was kneeling down and said, stand up. I myself am just a man. And while Peter was talking with him, he went on in and found that many had come together there. So Peter now realizes he's got an audience waiting for him. Something bigger than himself is happening. And this spontaneousness, to Peter, this was spontaneous. Pause. Peter's just out on his porch waiting for his snack. Now, I don't know who was fixing him a snack, but apparently he had a snack team. Who wants to be a part of my snack team? I would love to have a snack team. Oh, I got volunteers. Okay, we're going to get together and talk about that. 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, and 11 o'clock snacks. But Peter's just waiting for his snack. And all of a sudden, God says, don't call anything that I've said is clean, unclean, Peter. And Peter's trying to wrap his mind around what's going on. The doorbell's ringing. He answers the door. And these guys said, come with us, get in the van. And Peter's like, okay. He gets in the van. And now it's a really sketchy van, of course. And he goes all the way to this person he's never met, and there's a church congregation waiting for him in the living room. Just that fast. It's spontaneous, church. But Peter is obedient, even though he hasn't wrapped his mind around it. We like to wrap our mind around it, and I know this is my struggle. I want to have the plan. I want to have the plan because I love it when a plan comes together, which means I wanted to have a plan in the first place. But the greatest fruit I've ever seen in my ministry or in the ministry of those doing anything worth anything generally comes in forms of spontaneous obedience, planned as well, but often spontaneous. Look at Peter, have to get oriented here in verse 29. He just says, why did you send for me? Guys, tell me, what am I doing here? What am I doing here? Why did you send for me? Peter still didn't have his mind wrapped around this. And you know what? That was okay. Because then, after Peter got the revelation back at the beginning of the chapter from God, now Peter gets a chance to give revelation. And that's what this is about this morning. We have a revelation from God that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and that we are sinners, and that he died on the cross for our sins, and that he's made that salvation available to everybody, not just Jews, but also Gentiles. Not just our neighborhood and community, but every neighborhood and community. And we are called to go and give that when the opportunity arises, and that's nothing we can really plan for. We can prepare for and equip for and address our mentality, but when that moment comes, we have to go. We have to be ready to go. We have to be ready to move. And Peter even makes a confession. Verse 34, then Peter began to speak. Now I really understand that God doesn't show favoritism. In other words, Peter just said, you taught me a lesson I haven't learned yet. And yet Jesus said it the very first time we have a record of Jesus meeting Peter. He said, come with me and fish for people. Peter's like, I get it. I get it. If you were to summarize what Peter got, it's John 3:16. For God so loved the what? The world. I have us repeat this so often because I think we're still forgetting it. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son that how many? Whoever, no, you got to say it the King James way that I grew up with. Whosoever. Get that so in there. From the Holy Bible. I'm serious. That is how I memorized it. Thank you, Alvin. Whosoever. This is open to everybody, and Peter has to get this message again, but guess what? The bottom line here, Peter doesn't get a rebuke. You know why? He was obedient. It took a few times. It took a few times, but Peter was obedient in that spontaneous invitation, and I believe we have those invitations coming up daily. So I want you to take a moment here. I want you to take a moment and think with me, what can you do? What can you do to be prepared? Because you can't plan for the spontaneous. Who are you willing to say no to this week? What event are you willing to knock off your calendar if God brings a spontaneous opportunity to share the truth with somebody, to breathe hope into somebody's life? What good thing are you willing to, just one thing, what is one good thing you've already got on your calendar you're willing to say no to this week so that you can do a better yes? Because it's going to be spontaneous, and you know what? I'm praying you get a spontaneous opportunity this week. I'm praying I get a spontaneous opportunity this week. I'm going to chop this ear thing in half here in a second. But as we close, let me share you about one of the greatest opportunities that meant the most to me of spontaneous obedience and making room for spontaneity. Again, as I said, there was 5 of us on this trip where we got stuck in Johnston City, Illinois, and we were blessed in Johnston City, Illinois. And so many people reached out to us, and of course, we're asking, what can we do for you? How can we reach back? And there really wasn't a way at that time. And when we left, we had a mason jar in the center console full of coins, bunch of quarters. And we stopped at a gas station on the way back home. We were in Kansas. We were almost home to Wichita. We were in Kansas. We'd made it to the state line. And we go into a gas station. It's about 1 in the morning. And you know how it is when you're coming off the end of a trip anyway. You're already like, let's just get home. Well, we had to make the rest. I'm sorry. My sisters had to go to the bathroom. Us boys could have made it wait because we had empty 2 liters under the seat. But anyway. We done with the visual? Okay. We go into this gas station, and there's just one gas station clerk, and we make our way back to the bathrooms, except it's one of those really sketchy gas stations with all the weird ceramic decorations they're selling for like $100 a piece, you know? And so there's all of us little kids, and we're trying to make our way around all that. And we did. We went to the bathroom. We come back, and we're leaving, and my sister, who will remain nameless, Abigail, was coming towards the exit door, and her shoulder bumped a $40 ceramic decoration onto the floor, and it shatters. And all of us just stopped, because as a good gentleman, I was holding the door open. And as a good brother, I was like, what did you do? And the cashier said, don't worry, I got it. You go on. I got it. Go on. She didn't know our story. She didn't know we just had coins in the jar. She didn't know what, yeah, we look like a mess because we're Joneses, but she didn't know. She said, don't worry about it. Go on. I'll pay for it. And at that point, what struck me the most was I don't even remember any other words other than thank you. Everybody's just exhausted, and it was just, my dad was just like, thank you, and we got back in the van, and we went home. For everything that the church people did, that meant a ton to us, and that was beautiful. But I'll tell you, that lady at the cash register, probably making minimum wage, probably hating her second shift overnight job and thinking, what good am I going to do in the middle of nowhere, Kansas, on the side of a highway at a gas station? She had a profound impact on my life, on learning how to make room for the spontaneous, because I know for her, I know how budgeting and gas station items and wholesale works. I know that somebody had to pay for something there. She was either willing to get chewed out by a supervisor or willing to take the money out of her own paycheck. I don't know what. But that was a blessing to us. That just freed us up to get on home. And I want to free you up to get on home here in a bit. But we've got more to celebrate this morning. We're going to have a baptism here in a little bit. So Joe's going to come up and lead us in an invitation. And we'll have, no, not invitation. Are we doing invitation after baptism? Invitation now, because, hey, it's a time for decisions. But here's what I want to encourage you with while they get ready to lead us in this. And I need to give them their lectern back here. Have you made room for the spontaneous this week? Is there one thing that you're willing to say no to? One good thing. I'm serious. Go over your calendars, go over your alarms, and say, hey, is there one item? Maybe you don't have to say no to it. Is there one good item that I can say no to if something comes up? And see if the Lord won't test that. See if he won't bring you somebody who says, hey, can you get together in 5 minutes? Hey, can you come over for 5 minutes? Hey, and then you can say, you know what? I've already decided I can say no to this. Let's do it. Because I'm going to be praying for that this week. That is how the church grows. That's how the church grew. That's how the kingdom has an influence, is when we say yes to the spontaneous. That's a spirit of hospitality that will turn the world upside down. Please pray with me. Heavenly Father, we're yours. We're committed to you. I thank you for how You've been faithful to us. Even when we've struggled with faithfulness to you, you've still called us back. Just like with Peter, you called him 3 times. He kept saying no, and you knew that ultimately, more than he wanted to be safe, he wanted to be safe in your arms and your will. I pray that we feel that caress this morning from you, that we are safe in your will. I pray for anyone here this morning, Lord, who has yet to make a decision for you, that this is the time and this is the place. You make it clear. You've given them this opportunity. They're surrounded by a church family who loves them. Whether they know them well or not, they love them. I pray we reach out to you in obedience, accept your hand of grace, and bow before your throne. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.